Hello again. If you get your information from any sources other than Fox News, and therefore already know that Tucker Carlson lies, there won't be much in this video that you don't already probably know. Welcome anyways. If, however, you get all your information from Tucker Carlson and other right-wing news sites, and you believe all the lies that they tell you, welcome even more. I make these videos for you, because I need you to know that we are not your enemy. They're all lying about us. No, really, they are. Tucker's lying to you about people like me so that you'll think I'm evil and hate me. Before I started making these videos and looking very hard at what Tucker's telling you every night, I was sure that Tucker was just lying to you about us, making you hate us, so you'd watch him and make him rich. I'm not so sure anymore. After watching this video, I'm getting the feeling that Tucker really wants the Civil War. He wants you to put a bullet in my brain. He definitely wants some of the crazier people in his audience opening fire in an FBI building. You may think I'm being a bit hyperbolic, a bit paranoid, but it's actually happened. On August 11th, a man was shot dead in Ohio because he attacked an FBI field office because of all the lies right-wing information sources told him about the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago. On September 1st, an ex-police officer got sentenced to 10 years in prison for his part in the Jan 6 riots. All that for, as I will demonstrate to you here, lies. Really, it's all lies. Carlson lies, and people like you pay the price. Nobody wants to see that. I don't want to see that. And this video is just more of those lies. Carlson spends this entire segment lying that the DOJ is arresting people simply because, quote, they disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration, unquote. He'll talk about 14 people. If you've ever heard of any of them, I'd be very surprised. They are political nobodies. They have no power. They're not a threat in any way to Biden's political agenda. Carlson doesn't even attempt to show you how they could be. Really, not for a single one of them. He just needs you to believe they are being targeted for political reasons. That's why he makes sure not to tell you the crimes for which they're actually investigated, charged, and or convicted. It's okay, though. I'll tell you. I think, though, that you should ask yourself why Tucker feels the need to lie to you. And more importantly, why he thinks he can get away with it. He could just tell you the truth and let you come to your own conclusions, but he doesn't. He wants something from you. And whatever that is, it's definitely not in your best interest. Let's watch.
But we're here in Brazil broadcasting all week for a reason. If you're worried about the future of the United States, this is a good place to come to get a glimpse of it, or what it might look like depending on what choices we make.
As you'll see shortly, there is no reason to even mention Brazil. Carlson is about to make the most ridiculous transition from Brazil to China, to energy prices, to American sovereignty, to Biden jailing his political opposition in the course of about 3 minutes. None of it will make any sense whatsoever. He does it for one reason, to make you feel, not think, but to feel that Biden might actually have a motivation for arresting people just like you. Carlson knows that's ridiculous, and he knows he can't actually give you any evidence. So he tells you a scary story that if you're not paying very close attention, will make some kind of sense, maybe. But mostly, he's just trying to scare you so that you'll be more susceptible to the lies he's about to tell you. That's why he doesn't tell you whether Brazil is something for which we'd want to strive or to avoid. What does it mean to say that Brazil could offer us a glimpse into our future? Is that good or bad? No idea. Well, that's the point. You're not supposed to understand what he's saying. It's not supposed to make sense. It's just supposed to make you feel uneasy, a bit anxious. About what? It doesn't matter.
Brazil and the United States have much more in common than we realize. Both are huge countries. Brazil is actually a little larger than the continental United States. Countries with deep natural resources, diverse physical environment,
which will all be relevant to nothing.
Diverse population, and a very divided political climate.
Yes, we have a very divided political climate because people like Tucker Carlson go on TV every night and lie about millions of Americans and the government we elected. And people like you believe every word they say. Hopefully, I can change that. And you'll understand how a great deal of the political division in the US, the reasons you hate us, is based on nothing but lies.
On one side, you have a nationalist party. It's currently in power now, at least controls the executive in Brazil. On the other side, you have, in effect, a globalist party.
So, I have no idea if this is an accurate description of the party's positions in Brazil. But I know it's not true here. I know. Your reason for supporting Trump was because he put America first and the Democrats put America last. Or at least that's what Trump and Tucker have been telling you for years. The problem, again, is that none of that is actually true. Both Democrats and Republicans believe we are putting America first. We might disagree as to exactly how we should go about doing that. And that's an argument we can have because it might be an actual difference. But it's just silly for you to believe that we Democrats don't care about America or Americans.
And the tone of the politics here is bitter and the stakes are very high. People go to prison in Brazil routinely when they lose elections.
And that right there is the only reason he started in Brazil. So he could plant in your head the idea of people going to prison for no reason other than they lost an election. It doesn't even matter if it's true. It might be. I actually have no idea, and you know you certainly aren't going to check. Maybe they have corrupt politicians who belong in prison. I don't know. If so, that would be justice. Tucker's not about to give you any more information, though. No history, nothing to help you understand what's happening there, because information might get you thinking. And that's the last thing Tucker wants you to do. He just wants you to believe that it's just the winning party abusing power. He's just asserting that somebody somewhere is doing it. And then when he proceeds shortly to tell you that Biden is doing the same thing, you'll be more likely to believe that's possible.
But the reason we're here is to take a look specifically at what China is doing in Brazil.
In other words, all that stuff he just told you isn't relevant to what he's about to say. It was just to put you in a state of mind where you'd be receptive to the fearmonger.
All through Latin America and the Caribbean, and of course, all through Africa, China has effectively become the dominant colonial power, taking over countries mostly through economic deals, trade deals, through the presence of Chinese companies, and then exploiting those countries for their natural resources and effectively controlling their political systems. Brazil is the last pro-American country of any size in Latin America, but it's also the last country resisting China's colonial efforts. And we thought that would be worth watching, considering what's happening in our country and our relationship with China. Where's the Biden administration in all of this? Well, the Biden administration has, in effect, done nothing to protect Brazil from China's colonial interests. And in fact, they've done a lot to help China by weakening the relationship between the U.S. and Brazil and by weakening America's position in the world. They've done this quite aggressively. You've watched it, you're living it. Energy prices, which are the key to any economy, have skyrocketed. That's happened on purpose. This administration has done that, both with its sanction regimes against Russia and its emphasis on, quote, green energy. As a result of those two factors, you're seeing the biggest rise in gas prices in American history. And at the same time, you're seeing a move to green energy forms that we buy from China. Solar panels, wind farms, the components for those come from China. So effectively, you're seeing a transfer of our energy grid from American control to Chinese control. This is an attack on the most basic institutions in American life. This is handing sovereignty over to our main global rival. It's bad for America. In fact, it's the worst possible thing for America. So in a functioning democratic system, this would be a problem for the people trying to do it. You can't undermine the country you lead and expect to continue to lead it in a democracy. And the Biden administration knows this. And that's one of the reasons that the signature tactic of the Biden administration, this is our topic tonight, has been the criminalizing of American politics. Why have a political debate when you can just arrest people who disagree with you?
So if that made no sense whatsoever to you, let me help. Carlson needs you to believe that the Biden administration is undermining the United States, threatening our very sovereignty by buying components for wind and solar power from China. And now he's going to arrest people. Got it now? No? Yeah, me neither. No thinking person can believe that makes any sense. Carlson's about to tell you about 14 people who've been arrested despite committing no recognizable crimes other than disagreeing with the Biden administration. Tucker recognizes that even his most unquestioning viewer is going to ask, why? That nonsense that he just said is his attempt to provide you with Biden's motivation. Unlike every other despot throughout history who has used authoritarian rule to amass power for themselves, Biden's trying to give his power to China. And apparently, the people that Tucker's going to talk about are the primary obstacles from him doing that. So he's just going to arrest them. That, of course, makes zero sense if you think about it for more than a second. But that's all that 2-minute, 19-second stream of incoherent blather was for.
And that has happened far below the media radar since the day Joe Biden was elected. And tonight, to show it, we want to go through a list of Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement on the orders of the Biden administration, not because they committed recognizable crimes, but because they disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration. Now, again, you're not reading about this in the New York Times because the rest of the media are pretending that it's not happening.
So, we finally get to what he's actually going to talk about. Let's break down what he just said. He primed you for the lies with this.
People go to prison in Brazil routinely when they lose elections.
And?
Why have a political debate when you can just arrest people who disagree with you?
And here's what he says he's going to show you.
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement
and
on the orders of the Biden administration,
and
not because they committed recognizable crimes,
and
but because they disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And finally,
you're not reading about this in the New York Times.
So, if Carlson were trying to inform you of something that's actually happening in the United States, he would proceed to show you how each of these cases he discusses satisfy all 5 conditions. You will see that other than being arrested, and that's not even true for about half of them, he proves none of it. I will, however, show you that the opposite is true. Well, that's not technically correct. His claim that you're not reading about this in the New York Times is probably correct. Not because the New York Times didn't cover the stories, but because you're not reading the New York Times. But that, again, is just Tucker telling you not to read the New York Times, because they don't cover anything you care about. I'll show you, however, that the New York Times reported on 13 of the 14 people that Carlson discusses. For all the people who were arrested, and many who have yet to be arrested, there are recognizable crimes. I can't say anything about the on the orders of the Biden administration part, because I can't prove a negative. I can't prove that an order has not been given. You should, however, be demanding that Carlson provide whatever evidence he has that the Biden administration is ordering anything. Until then, you should just assume he's lying to you. He also doesn't even try to show you in any of the cases how any of these people disagreed with the aims of the Biden administration. Not a one. Nothing. For any of this to work on you, Carlson needs you to forget everything you know about how our justice system works. Or more likely, he's expecting you not to know anything to forget. He's certainly hoping that you don't know any of this. That in order to get an arrest warrant, an indictment or complaint must be filed with the U.S. District Court, which includes an affidavit signed by a law enforcement officer that explains the crime committed as well as the role of the accused in that crime. Nobody in the United States can be arrested, little less tried, convicted, and sentenced without investigators being able to articulate a particular crime the person is suspected of committing. He needs you to forget that the DOJ can't just throw people in jail. He needs you to forget that juries of one's peers convict, that judges sentence, and the accused have a right to an attorney, none of which is controlled or influenced by the Biden administration. Carlson needs you to believe that Biden has somehow sidestepped the entire judicial system just to throw people who you've never heard of in prison so they don't stop him from undermining the country. If, however, you keep those simple facts in mind, you'll understand that all the stuff Carlson's going to say to you just can't be true, that it has to be lies. I'll show you how they're all lies anyways. and that the justice system in the United States is functioning exactly as it should. Let's watch Tucker lie to us.
And instead, they're focused on the January 6th committee, which has taken, in fact, a lead role in this effort, rounding up enemies of the state.
That's just another lie to get you to hate liberals and Democrats. The Jan 6 committee can't take a lead role in rounding up anybody. And nobody's calling anybody enemies of the state. Well, except for Trump. As I covered in my This Is Not a Scam video, though, this is just Tucker Carlson telling you again not to watch the hearings. Just rely on him to tell you everything you know about them. And unfortunately, you and I both know it's working. You're not watching the hearings.
The entire process is a farce, and that was proved yesterday. If you watched the hearings yesterday, you know how absurd it is.
Now, if you'd actually watched the hearings, which you didn't, unfortunately, you'd already know, like all of us who did, that there was nothing absurd about them and that everything Carlson's about to say is a lie.
Democrats, with the help of Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, called up a star witness who testified she heard someone else say that Donald Trump attacked a Secret Service agent and tried to carjack the presidential limousine. Think about that. The President of the United States tried to seize control of the presidential limousine that he wasn't driving? It didn't make any sense.
It doesn't have to make sense. Cassidy Hutchinson was just testifying to the account that the Secret Service agent Tony Ornato told her. It's possible that Ornato lied to her about what happened, but we'll get back to that later. For now, you have to realize what Carlson is trying to do to you here. This part about Trump and the SUV was about 3 minutes of about an hour of testimony. Carlson wants you to believe that this was the only thing that came out of the hearing. And because it doesn't make sense, none of it made sense. If you watched the hearing, this is what you would have seen.
I looked at Tony and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got back. What happened?" Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had very strong, a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel. And when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And was Mr. Engel in the room as Mr. Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree with any part of the story from Mr. Ornato?
Mr. Engel did not correct or disagree with any part of the story.
Did Mr. Engel or Mr. Ornato ever after that tell you that what Mr. Ornato had just said was untrue?
Neither Mr. Ornato nor Mr. Engel told me ever that it was untrue.
As you just saw, Cassidy Hutchinson never claimed to have seen this happen. Now, if it's not true that Trump tried to seize control of the SUV, there's only two real options here. One, she lied about Ornato telling her the story in Engel's presence. Or two, Ornato made up, or at least embellished, the story when he told it to Hutchinson. Given that she was under oath, under penalty of perjury, I'm thinking the former is probably off the table. Well, that's just me, though. You might feel differently.
And then by the time that Secret Service agents who were on the scene denied the story to NBC News and other news outlets, nobody cared. They weren't even pretending that it was true. The initial story was the point. The shock value was the point, not the factual basis of it. That's what passes for rigorous investigation in Congress at the moment.
And Carlson just lied to you again. First, it wasn't, as Carlson said, the Secret Service agents who were on the scene who denied the story. It was an unnamed Secret Service official. Second, the controversy around the denial was covered on pretty much every outlet. Here's how CNN covered it.
So officials say the Secret Service agents involved that she's talking about, both Engel and Ornato, are ready to testify under oath, and that they do dispute her account. Our CNN security correspondent Josh Campbell has more. Josh, I mean, isn't it just so clear the American people need to hear from them under oath if they're disputing this?
That's right. I mean, Poppy, there were several stunning revelations from this hearing yesterday, including this alleged incident inside the up-armored presidential SUV as he was leaving that rally. And she says that Ornato told her that this incident occurred. Now, afterwards, an official with the Secret Service told me that Tony Ornato denies briefing her on this, telling her that this transpired. It's also worth pointing out that, according to this official, the lead Secret Service agent who was inside the vehicle denies that this incident ever occurred. Now, we're told that the Department of Homeland Security reached out to the January 6th Select Committee and said that these witnesses are willing to come testify to refute some of this testimony. We did get a statement, our colleague Ryan Nobles from the committee. I'll read you part of it. They say that the committee trusts the credibility of a witness who is willing to testify under oath and in public, but is also willing to hear any and all information that others may have that would aid in the investigation. So clearly, the Secret Service pushing back on this, saying that according to Ornato and these other officials, this didn't happen. It's also worth pointing out, though, that Cassidy Hutchinson is the only person who has testified in her own name under oath, under penalty of perjury. And so her lawyer is saying that the Secret Service needs to come forward and testify under oath if they are refuting this. Finally, Poppy, it's also worth pointing out that obviously we need to get the bottom of this incident. Obviously, an irate president allegedly assaulting his own security detail. But we can't lose sight of the fact that I think the biggest issue here is that no witness has disputed that Trump still wanted to go to the U.S. Capitol, knowing that there were armed people inside that crowd, leading this crowd, this angry crowd, towards the U.S. Capitol where those votes were being counted. So again, although it's important to get to the bottom of what happened inside the Suburban, no one is disputing.
Let's hear that part again.
But we can't lose sight of the fact that I think the biggest issue here is that no witness has disputed that Trump still wanted to go to the U.S. Capitol, knowing that there were armed people inside that crowd, leading this crowd, this angry crowd, towards the U.S. Capitol where those votes were being counted. So again, although it's important to get to the bottom of what happened inside the Suburban, no one is disputing that even after knowing that this crowd was dangerous, Trump still wanted to lead him to the Capitol.
And as you just saw, the Jan 6th committee was perfectly willing to have those two Secret Service agents testify under oath. For some reason, however, they still refused to do that. And it is, of course, just a coincidence that Tony Ornato retired a couple days before I shot this video. And I'm guessing that's the first time you heard that Trump wanted to go to the Capitol knowing that there were armed protesters there, and nobody in the Secret Service detail has denied that fact. And this is how NBC covered the denial.
Within hours of that hearing, sources close to both the Secret Service and former White House Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato claimed that the two said the incident never happened and were willing to testify to it under oath. We'll just note, though, the agency is not denying the former president was angry about not being taken to the Capitol, only whether or not there was an altercation. But now other Trump White House aides, former Communications Director Alyssa Farah and former advisor to the Vice President Olivia Troy are pushing back against Ornato's supposed denial. They say this wouldn't be the first time he denied conversation he had with his former colleagues. And it's worth noting that Ornato, whose appointment from a Secret Service official to top White House advisor was highly unprecedented at the time, is still employed right now.
I know Tucker's never told you that other Trump staffers have accused Ornato of lying about other incidents. The important part here, though, is that Tucker just lied to you again, that the denials were not picked up by the media and ignored by the committee. Those were just flat-out lies to you. And here's how it was covered in the Washington Post. The very first sentence says, much has been written about Hutchinson's reportedly disputed testimony that Ornato described an altercation between fellow Secret Service agent Bobby Engel and Trump. So, I think it's safe to assume that much has been written, and therefore, Tucker lied when he said it was ignored. And here's how the New York Times covered it. Yeah, it pretty much repeats all the same facts. The point here, again, is that Tucker just lied to you when he said the controversy about the denial wasn't being covered. These are just 4 instances of dozens I could have shown. This video would be hours long if I showed you all that was said about the denials. He just needs you to believe that the whole of media, Congress, and the DOJ are behaving dishonestly by withholding information from you, when he is the only one holding information from you. You need to recognize this. He's lying to you to get you to do something stupid. Don't let him succeed.
But no media outlet is going to revisit their decision to turn over their airwaves to the January 6th committee, even after yesterday's debacle.
That's just another lie Tucker Carlson has to tell you in order to get you not to watch the hearings so that you'll never find out how much he's been lying to you.
It is, in fact, a show trial. It is absurd by definition, and its absurdity is the point. The absurdity of it, the hollowness of it, sends the message. We run the justice system now. You are powerless.
Yes, the absurdity is the point. It just happens to be Tucker Carlson's arguments that are absurd. No reasonable person could think a congressional hearing could possibly show who runs the justice system and that you are powerless. Nobody. He just says things that make absolutely no sense, assuming you are not thinking. Please, start thinking. What Carlson just said should make no sense to you. It's just not reality. But on to the first gross miscarriage of justice now. Finally.
And that is the same message the Biden administration has sent to America for the last year and a half with the help of Merrick Garland, the most political attorney general in history. Here's a list of the things they've done because no one else has assembled it. Here we go. January 27th, 2021, days after Joe Biden's inauguration, the Justice Department arrests a man called Douglas Mackey, known online as Ricky Vaughn. You heard very little about this. Why? Because Douglas Mackey had extremist political views. But under the American system, it doesn't matter if you have unattractive or unpopular views. Your views are protected by the First Amendment. He was arrested for what? A crime? No. For creating internet memes that made fun of Hillary Clinton. But according to the Justice Department, those memes, quote, deprived individuals of their constitutional right to vote. So he went to jail.
Here's how the New York Times covered it. Federal prosecutors accused Douglas Mackey of coordinating with co-conspirators to spread memes on Twitter falsely claiming that Hillary Clinton supporters could vote by sending a text message to a specific phone number. As a result of the misinformation campaign, prosecutors said at least 4,900 unique phone numbers texted the number in a futile effort to cast votes for Clinton. And here's the DOJ complaint. Mackey made coordinated use of social media to spread misinformation relevant to the impending 2016 presidential election. Disinformation often took the forms of memes. Mackey and his co-conspirators expressed desire that the memes would influence the behaviors of those who saw them. As the elections approached, Mackey spread disinformation about the manner by which citizens could and should cast their votes during the election, conduct that constitutes a criminal infringement of the right to vote. Mackey formulated, created, and disseminated information over social media that claimed, among other things, that supporters of a presidential candidate from one of the 2 main political parties could and should vote for the candidate by posting a specific hashtag on Twitter or Facebook, or by texting the candidate's first name to a specific telephone text code. Now you know that Tucker just lied to you about Mackey being arrested for
creating internet memes that made fun of Hillary Clinton.
He was in clear violation of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 241, a clearly
recognizable crime.
And Mackey's
extremist political views
had zero to do with anything. That was just another scare tactic Tucker threw in there, thinking that maybe you'd draw the connection that your extremist political views may be criminalized next. Nobody's being arrested for their political views, extremist or otherwise. Nobody. This was just another instance of the FBI and DOJ doing their jobs as they're supposed to. So if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they're not covering it. And finally, Carlson didn't even attempt to show you how Mackey
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
So, Tucker's 0 for 1. Let's look at the next miscarriage of justice.
Then on February 3rd of the same year, 2021, the FBI raids the homes of Russell Taylor and Alan Hostetler. What did they do wrong? Well, they organized a lawful political rally on January 6th. They even had a permit for the rally. Taylor also committed the grave offense of being seen with Roger Stone in the days before January 6th. That's now a crime, too. Not in a free country, but in ours.
Here again is how the New York Times covered it. Federal prosecutors filed a wide-ranging conspiracy indictment on Thursday accusing 6 California men said to be connected to a radical gun rights movement called the Three Percenters with plotting to assault the Capitol on Jan 6th. The 20-page indictment was also the first to be brought against a group of alleged Three Percenters. Starting shortly after the election, Mr. Hostetler used the American Phoenix Project to advocate violence against certain groups and individuals that supported the 2020 election results. At the end of November, for example, he posted a video on the group's YouTube channel in which he accused those who had not challenged the results of committing treason. Some people at the highest level, he said, need to be made an example of with an execution or 3. The following month, Mr. Hostetler gave a speech repeating his death threats against those who doubted Trump and won. Execution is the just punishment of the ringleaders of this coup, the indictment quotes him as saying. And you can see the indictment here. So we have conspiracy to obstruct official proceedings, obstruction of an official proceeding, aiding and abetting, obstruction of law enforcement during a civil disorder and aiding and abetting, entering and remaining in a restricted building on grounds and carrying a deadly weapon. No, wait. Really? Carlson's been telling us that they weren't armed. Another one of those entering and remaining things, tampering with documents and proceedings, unlawful possession of dangerous weapon on the Capitol grounds and the buildings. So, nothing about organizing a
lawful political rally on January 6th.
And nothing about
being seen with Roger Stone.
It's almost as if Tucker Carlson just lied to you. These are clearly
recognizable crimes.
And if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they're not covering it. And finally, Carlson didn't even attempt to show you how these two political masterminds
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
Well, with the exception that it is legitimate and that there should be one. This is clearly just another instance of the FBI and DOJ just doing their jobs. So, 0 for 2. Oh, wait, 0 for 3, because that was 2 people. Let's look at the next miscarriage of justice.
Then on April 28th, 2021, the Fed seized the cell phones and computers belonging to the president's former lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. That didn't used to be allowed. You can't seize the records of someone's attorney.
You can when the attorney is the one committing the crime. You all know that attorneys are not above the law, right?
Those are confidential lawyer-client communications. Now, at the time, we were told that Rudy Giuliani had done something illegal in Ukraine. The walls were closing in. He was never charged with anything like that because it was all fake.
So, Tucker tells you straight out that Giuliani isn't even one of the
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
So, instant fail. But let's go through the motions anyways. Here's how the New York Times covered it. Federal investigators on Wednesday seized cell phones and computers from Giuliani, stepping up a criminal investigation of Giuliani's dealings in Ukraine. FBI agents executed search warrants around 6 a.m. at Giuliani's apartment on Madison Avenue and his Park Avenue office in Manhattan, carting away the electronic devices. The execution of search warrants is an extraordinary action for prosecutors to take against a lawyer, let alone a lawyer of a former president. The move marked a major development in the long-running investigation into Giuliani, which examined some of the same people and conduct that were at the center of Trump's first impeachment trial. So, it's not yet been determined whether he committed
recognizable crimes.
That's what they're investigating. This video is going to be long enough without getting into the weeds of everything Giuliani did in Ukraine that is potentially illegal. I'll just point out this one simple little fact. This investigation started when Trump was president and Bill Barr was the Attorney General. Biden had nothing to do with it. I have no idea what's happening in this case, but last I checked, Giuliani is a free man. So either they didn't find enough evidence to prosecute, or they are continuing with the investigation exactly how our justice system should work. Anyway, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they're not covering it. And again, Carlson didn't even attempt to show you how Giuliani
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
That's 0 for 4. Let's look at the next miscarriage of justice.
But they got his privileged communications anyway. Then on June 24th, 2021, the feds raided the home of a Giuliani associate called George Dixon. The FBI never explained the purpose of that raid, but Dixon was working on a documentary about Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and their business dealings in Ukraine, and that's no longer allowed. A direct attack on the free press, not covered by the media.
Okay, this is the one that the New York Times really didn't cover. I actually couldn't find any mention of it anywhere. Tucker must have dug deep for this one. By the way, have you ever heard of him? No, me neither. But somehow he was a big enough threat to the Biden administration that Biden had to go after him. You should also note that since Tucker didn't say he was arrested, little less in jail, we can assume that he wasn't one of the
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
And he should be free to complete his documentary. I wonder when it'll drop. And again, Tucker didn't mention any way in which he
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
That's 0 for 5. Let's look at the next miscarriage of justice.
And then, because this list does go on January 19th, 2021, a journalist at InfoWars called Owen Schroyer was arrested and charged. Why? Well, according to the federal complaint, Schroyer told the crowd on January 6th, quote, "Today we march for the Capitol because on this historic January 6, 2021, we have to let our congressmen and women know, and we have to let Mike Pence know that they stole the election," end quote. Now, you may not agree with that, or maybe you do, it doesn't matter. That's protected speech under our Constitution. But under Joe Biden, it's a crime.
And in the very next line of the complaint, it says, after Schroyer arrived at the Capitol grounds, he entered the restricted area. In the screenshots below, Schroyer can be seen standing above the crowd on the west side of the Capitol next to the inauguration stage. And in that very same complaint, we can see the actual crimes with which he was charged. Knowingly entering or remaining in any restricted building or grounds without lawful authority, and violent entry and disorderly conduct on Capitol grounds. He wasn't charged for his words, just for the
recognizable crimes
he actually committed. Again, you need to ask yourself why Tucker's just going to lie to you like that. What's he trying to get from you? What must he think of your intelligence that he just assumes you won't check? Here again is how the New York Times covered it. Mr. Schroyer marched on the Capitol with Mr. Jones and Alexander, the Stop the Steal organizer, on Jan 6 and was arrested months later on disorderly conduct charges. Here's the interesting part that blows up Tucker's narrative, though. Neither Mr. Jones nor Mr. Alexander has been charged. Both men had connections to the Trump White House. Mr. Jones helped organize the rally at the Ellipse near the White House before the riot and has said that White House officials told him that he was to lead a march to the Capitol where Trump would speak. So, despite Jones helping to organize the rally and Alexander organizing the Stop the Steal movement, neither of them were arrested. The Biden administration apparently thought the best way to abuse their power would be to go after that sidekick. Surely, you can see how that makes absolutely no sense. That is the narrative, though, that Tucker Carlson is trying to push on you. It's quite literally nonsense. Even if Tucker were correct that Schroyer was arrested for,
quote, "Today we march for the Capitol because on this historic January 6, 2021, we have to let our congressmen and women know, and we have to let Mike Pence know that they stole the election," end quote.
That is not disagreeing
the political aims of the Biden administration.
Again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. So, 0 for 6. Let's take a look at the next miscarriage of justice.
And then on November 6, 2021, the FBI raided the homes of several more journalists who worked for Project Veritas, including the organization's founder, James O'Keefe. What did they do wrong? Drug trafficking, human trafficking? No. They reported on a diary written by Joe Biden's daughter, Ashley. And in that diary, Biden's daughter reveals to the rest of us that Joe Biden showered with her in a way that she described as inappropriate and that she blames for making her sexually compulsive in later life. For having access to that information, the FBI raided Project Veritas.
So, here's how the New York Times covered it. Federal authorities on Saturday searched the home of James O'Keefe, the founder of the conservative group Project Veritas, the day after Mr. O'Keefe acknowledged that the group was under investigation by the Justice Department in connection with the diary reported to have been stolen from Ashley Biden, the president's daughter. The FBI carried out a court-ordered search of Mr. O'Keefe's apartment early on Saturday morning after having searched the homes of 2 associates of Mr. O'Keefe on Thursday as part of the investigation. And here's more of what the New York Times reported. Federal prosecutors presented new evidence on Thursday implicating the conservative group Project Veritas in the theft of a diary and items belonging to Ashley Biden, laying out in court papers their fullest account yet of how allies of President Trump tried to use the diary to undercut Biden in the final days of the 2020 campaign. The court papers were filed in connection with the guilty pleas on Thursday of 2 Florida residents who admitted in federal court in Manhattan that they had stolen the diary and sold it to Project Veritas. Prosecutors directly tied Project Veritas to the theft of Ms. Biden's items in the court papers, saying that an employee for the group had directed the defendants to steal additional items to authenticate the diary and paid them additional money after receiving them. So, the issue is not that they had access to information. The issue is that they took possession of material they knew was stolen and asked for more stolen material. This is just another lie Tucker told you. So, O'Keefe is currently not one of the
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
But that may change in the very near future. And if it does, it will be for
Recognizable crimes
like purchase and possession of stolen goods. And again, even if Carlson were right, which he isn't, that
for having access to that information, the FBI raided Project Veritas.
That is still not showing how O'Keefe
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. So, 0 for 7. Let's look at the next miscarriage of justice.
I'm sorry, so what is this regarding?
This is a search warrant. This open up.
Let me see your hand. Open your hand. My hand, sir.
So there's another team coming up? Yeah. So maybe we'll split up into like areas of the house.
Oh, Trump's a fascist. Remember that? Did Trump's DOJ raid the homes of a lot of journalists who embarrassed his children? No, you don't remember that because it didn't happen.
And as you've just seen, it didn't happen here either. That was just another example of Tucker lying to you.
But Joe Biden's Justice Department has done that. And then they kept going. Later that same month, on November 15th of last year, the Justice Department arrested one of the most prominent critics. That would be former Trump advisor Steve Bannon. Now, what did Steve Bannon do wrong? Did he commit a crime on January 6th? No, he didn't, and no one claims otherwise. Instead, Bannon's crime was that he didn't bend the knee for the January 6th committee. He cited executive privilege. According to Nancy Pelosi, that means Steve Bannon belongs in jail.
Do you think people who refuse to comply with congressional subpoenas should be prosecuted by the Justice Department and at the end of the day go to jail?
Yes.
You do?
I do. Well, first of all, this, people say, well, this hasn't happened before. We haven't had an insurrection incited by the President of the United States and one of his toadies having knowledge of, advanced knowledge of that happening. So, in fact, it's important for a number of reasons. It's important for us to find the truth about what happened on January 6th, an assault on our Constitution, our Congress, and our Capitol.
An assault on the Constitution. Okay. So, no, in other words, we don't arrest people for ignoring congressional subpoenas, particularly when they cite executive privilege, a principle that has a long history in American history. We've never done that. But we can do it now because it was, quote, an insurrection that wasn't armed, wasn't planned, and didn't actually insurrect anything, but it was still an insurrection. Now you're beginning to see why it's been so important from the very first day for the media to describe what happened on January 6th, not as a riot, but as an insurrection, because if it's an insurrection, they can violate your civil rights, and they have, and they continue to.
None of what Tucker just played or said is of any relevance to the crime for which Bannon was convicted. So this is a complete sidetrack, but I think it's useful for you to understand what the committee wanted to talk about with Bannon. First, there was this.
Mother Jones obtained leaked audio of Bannon sharing what he knew with a group of associates just days before the 2020 election.
The Democrats, more of our people vote early that count, theirs voted mail. And so they're going to have a natural disadvantage, and Trump's going to take advantage of it. That's our strategy. He's going to declare himself a winner. So when you wake up Wednesday morning, it's going to be a firestorm. Also, if Trump is losing by 10 or 11 o'clock at night, it's going to be even crazier. No, because he's going to sit right there and say they stole it.
Agree.
I'm directing the Attorney General to shut down all ballot places in all 50 states. It's going to be no. He's not going out easy. If Biden's winning, Trump is going to do some crazy shit.
Okay, this is a bit of a sidetrack, but you need to notice how Bannon and the people to whom he was talking thought it was funny how Trump was planning on creating a constitutional crisis, possibly even a civil war if he lost the election. You know who would be the casualties of that war, right? It wouldn't be the people like Bannon. It would be people just like you who were gullible enough to storm the Capitol over what Bannon and company knew very well was a lie. They think it's funny that a retired New York City police officer got sentenced to 10 years in prison for his role in the Capitol riot. They think it's good theater. These people don't give a fuck about you. That includes Tucker Carlson, who, in this very segment, is filling your head with lies in order to get you to do something stupid. You need to see this. And the committee also wants to ask Bannon about his plan to throw out the votes of over 81 million Americans.
You mentioned this plan. Here's Steve Bannon talking about it on January 6th.
So I keep saying the mantra, you call the play, now run the play. Right? It's like the old Green Bay power sweep. It's very simple. Just one thing leads to another, very logical, and the victories are firm.
But back to the actual issue, specifically Bannon ignoring the subpoena. Here's what the New York Times had to say about it. For weeks, Stephen K. Bannon delivered heated speeches about his pending trial, promising at one point to go medieval on the prosecutors who had charged him with refusing to comply with the subpoena issued by the House Select Committee. But once in court, Bannon, being the little punk-ass bitch that he realized, I had that, decided not to testify or mount any sort of defense. And on Friday, Bannon was convicted of 2 counts of contempt of Congress. The jury reached the verdict after less than 3 hours of deliberation. And here's the Justice Department's press release. Stephen K. Bannon was found guilty by a jury today of 2 counts of contempt of Congress stemming from his failure to comply with the subpoena issued by the House Select Committee. Bannon was found guilty of 1 contempt count involving his refusal to appear for a deposition and another involving his refusal to produce documents, despite a subpoena from the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. The subpoena to Stephen Bannon was not an invitation that could be rejected or ignored, said Matthew M. Graves, U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. Mr. Bannon had an obligation to appear before the House Select Committee to give testimony and provide documents. His refusal to do so was deliberate, and now a jury has found that he must pay the consequences. The tenets of our government rely upon citizens adhering to the established rules of law. Lawful tools such as subpoenas and other legal orders are critical in our system of government, said Stephen M. D'Antuono, Assistant Director in charge of the FBI Washington Field Office. Mr. Bannon was found guilty of contempt by a jury of his peers for his choice to ignore a lawful subpoena. The FBI will continue our sworn duty to investigate those who have committed violations of our laws and hold them accountable for their actions. So, let's revisit that nonsense that Tucker Carlson just told you about. Whatever Nancy Pelosi thinks is irrelevant. He only included her because he knows you hate her, and you will reflexively disagree with anything she has to say, and to distract you from the simple fact that a jury of 12 of our fellow Americans found Bannon guilty. Biden and Pelosi don't control them. They can't force a jury to convict. The Department of Justice presented the evidence to a jury and they convicted. Please, let that sink in. A jury convicted. That's the way our system works. Juries convict, not presidents, not attorneys general, not departments of justice, not the FBI, not congressional committees, juries. They decided that Bannon was guilty as charged. So, all the nonsense with which Tucker Carlson just tried to confuse you, to scare you into believing that they are taking away your civil rights, the nonsense about executive privilege, whatever Pelosi thought, whether we arrest people for ignoring congressional subpoenas or whether it makes a difference if we call it insurrection instead of just a riot, whether it was armed or planned, is just irrelevant. It was about one thing and one thing only, whether Bannon or anybody could just declare a congressional subpoena invalid and ignore it. Whether he or you get to decide what is or isn't illegal. As Bannon's conviction in the court of law shows, you don't. The courts decided it was, and all Bannon's and Carlson's bluster won't keep Bannon out of jail. These were clearly
recognizable crimes.
And once again, Carlson doesn't even attempt to show you how Bannon
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And once again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. So, Carlson's a perfect 0 for 8. Let's move on to the next miscarriage of justice.
A day after Steve Bannon's arrest, this would be November 16th, 2021, the FBI raided the home of Sharona Bishop. That's the former campaign manager for Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado.
Lauren Boebert?
According to Bishop, here's what happened. Quote, while homeschooling my youngest children, the FBI decided it was necessary to bust open my front door with a battering ram.
Now, that right there should be throwing up all kinds of red flags for you. There is no chance they busted open her door with a battering ram. None.
And put me in handcuffs while they trampled through my home, terrifying my family.
Maybe. They usually don't put people in handcuffs when executing search warrants, but given that she's lying about the battering ram and what she's about to, there's no.
My daughter was pulled around by her hoodie by one of the agents.
Not a chance.
Now, why would you do this to the former chief of staff of a sitting member of Congress?
You wouldn't, and all reasonable people know she's lying.
Well, the FBI gave no reason. They took Bishop's cell phone and they left, never charged with a crime.
Oh, so she's not one of the
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
It's almost as if Tucker doesn't even care what he said he was going to show you. And here's how the New York Times covered it. Well, sort of. This article is mostly about Tina Peters, Carlson's next victim of injustice. On April 23rd, Ms. Peters, Ms. Brown, another aide, and Sharona Bishop, a former campaign manager for Ms. Boebert, met with Douglas Frank, a high school math and science teacher in Ohio, whose debunked theories have been influential among the election conspiracists. Ms. Peters asked Mr. Frank if he could open the machines, but he said it was against the law based on county contracts. Ms. Bishop then suggested using a routine software procedure known as a trusted build to get inside the machines, according to the documents. Ms. Bishop has not been charged with any wrongdoing. So, at least Carlson got that right. She wasn't charged with a crime because she didn't commit one. The FBI just suspected that she might have evidence of one. So this is not really even a story at all if you don't believe in the obvious lies about how the FBI mistreated her and her family during the execution of the search warrant. Nevertheless, Carlson doesn't even attempt to show how Bishop
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And once again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. 0 for 9. And this leads us very nicely to the next miscarriage of justice.
Then that same day, and you didn't read this in the New York Times either.
Only because you don't read the New York Times.
The feds hit the home of Mesa County Republican clerk Tina Peters. What was the justification for that raid? We're breaking into a lot of houses all of a sudden of Trump voters.
Wait, when has it become about Trump voters? This is supposed to be a list of people being persecuted because they
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
But this, of course, is what Tucker has really been trying to tell you all along. They're rounding up Trump voters, and you could be next. It's all just lies to scare you and make you hate us.
Why? Well, in this case, DOJ said Peters raised doubts about the legitimacy of the last election. That's not allowed anymore. Can't question the outcome. They didn't arrest her. They just tore her house apart.
Yet another person on Carlson's list of
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
Who hasn't been
arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
Though to be fair to Carlson, she probably will be soon. The evidence against her is quite compelling. And again, here's how the New York Times covered it. Tina Peters, a county clerk running as a Republican for Secretary of State of Colorado, was indicted on 10 criminal counts related to the allegations that she tampered with election equipment after the 2020 election. Because of Peters' unusual scheme to interfere with voting machines, state officials could not establish confidence in the integrity or security of elections equipment, the indictment said. A grand jury indicted Peters on both felony and misdemeanor charges, including counts of attempting to influence a public servant, criminal impersonation, conspiracy to commit criminal impersonation, identity theft, first-degree official misconduct, violation of duty, and failing to comply with the Secretary of State. And here's the actual indictment. Let's see, all the things the New York Times accurately reported, plus beginning April 2021, Tina Peters and Belinda Nisley, either as principal actors and or acting as complicitors, devised and executed a deceptive scheme which was designed to influence public servants, breach security protocols, exceed permissible access to voting equipment, and set in motion the eventual distribution of confidential information to unauthorized people. Furthermore, these defendants, without permission or lawful authorization, also used the name and personal identifying information of Gerald Wood to further their criminal scheme. This unlawful use of Mr. Wood's identity by Tina Peters and Belinda Nisley also subjected Mr. Wood to various forms of liability and criminal exposure. And there's an entire section in the indictment called Criminal Conduct, where you can read about in detail what she and her co-conspirator did. It's about 3.5 pages, single-spaced, so I won't read it here. Suffice it to say, it doesn't mention anything about her being a Trump voter or raising
doubts about the legitimacy of the last election.
Let's be clear here. This genius was tampering with Dominion voting machines, which are
recognizable crimes,
because she thought she would find evidence that the machines were flipping votes to Biden. So, she's essentially facing jail time because she's stupid, not because she
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
Which again, Tucker didn't even try to show you how she did. And once again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. And that would be 0 for 10. But let's listen to all the completely irrelevant stuff that Tucker is going to throw at you in an attempt to confuse you.
But of course, even during McCarthy, no one did that. In May, she came on Fox Denver to explain what exactly happened to her. Watch.
My attorneys, when they read the indictment the other day, Harvey Steinberg, and I've got the best attorneys, and they just laughed. They said, "Are you kidding? This is a political maneuver to shine the light on me, to keep me from running against and defeating Jenna Griswold."
Sometimes I have to wonder how stupid Carlson thinks you are. Does he think that somebody like you, who follows Republican politics, won't know that Peters did not lose her bid for Secretary of State to Jenna Griswold? She lost a primary to Pam Anderson, another Republican, who I think we can safely assume is also an opponent of the Biden administration. Either way, this was for Secretary of State of Colorado. Let that sink in. Secretary of State of Colorado. Hardly a bulwark against the advancing socialism of the Biden administration. Now, just think for a second what Carlson wants you to believe. Republicans are supposed to already understand that Merrick Garland is corrupt and the DOJ is only attacking honest Americans who challenge the Biden administration. Yet somehow, opening an investigation into Tina Peters for questioning the integrity of the 2020 presidential election is going to cost her votes among those very same Republicans? Surely, you can see how that makes just absolutely no sense.
Oh, so in the name of punishing people for complaining about the last election, they're subverting elections currently taking place?
No.
And last night, the woman you just saw, Tina Peters, lost her bid for Secretary of State, which of course was the whole point of targeting her. Peters would not be the last opponent of the Biden administration running for office to be targeted by the Justice Department. On June 3rd, Peter Navarro, who was a trade aide to Donald Trump, was arrested at Washington National Airport and put in leg irons and put in jail.
I'm going to assume I don't need to go through all that again. This next miscarriage of justice is just Tucker Carlson plagiarizing his own work. I covered all this in my What's Going On Here video, and I won't repeat it. Suffice it to say, all that was nonsense. If you want to see why, watch the other video. I'm just going to call this 0 for 11 and speed it up a little bit to save some time.
Why? Well, days earlier, he sued the January 6th committee. He claimed executive privileges, communications with the president. Again, this is standard, a decades-old standard. And rather than go to court, the January 6th committee simply had him arrested at the airport and sent to jail in irons. Navarro went initially to explain what happened to him.
The mission of that partisan witch hunt kangaroo committee, which is unduly authorized and not properly constituted and has no subpoena power, they have only one mission: to concoct a fake hoax around January 6th based on criminal charges against Trump to prevent him from running for re-election and taking back the White House in 2025 January. That's all this is about.
So a decade ago, the Obama administration was caught sending automatic weapons to Mexican drug cartels, and Congress wanted to know more about this. Eric Holder, then the Attorney General, had a key role in this, Operation Fast and Furious, you may remember it, so they subpoenaed him. And he ignored the subpoena, and the media applauded. He was taking a noble position. But when Steve Bannon or Peter Navarro tried to do something like that, they went to jail. Again, we had this exact same thing happen in public 10 years ago. A federal judge ruled that Holder's privilege claim was not legitimate, and he was still never arrested. But the rules have changed. Why is that? No one in corporate media ever asked that question. Instead, they celebrated Peter Navarro's arrest, a 70-year-old man at an airport. It made their day.
He was indicted, and when you're indicted, you're arrested.
What Peter Navarro did, it was so far out of bounds, it's so indefensible. This prosecution is really about punishing Navarro based on his blatant disrespect for the congressional subpoena.
His latent disrespect. By the way, there's no constitutional requirement to have respect for anybody in the U.S. government.
And here's where Tucker, again, is just trying to confuse you. He's hoping you won't notice that they said nothing about respecting a person. But you saw that, right?
In fact, in a free country, you're encouraged to disagree. You are a citizen. You have that inherent right. But no more. The media think you should be sent to jail if you show disrespect.
You're seeing this by now, right? You're seeing how Tucker's just lying to you. Nobody he showed said anybody should be thrown in jail for disrespecting another person. You don't, however, get to unilaterally decide which subpoenas you're going to honor. No civil society could function if we allowed that. And as in the Bannon case that I just talked about, the judge and the jury also agreed that you don't get to decide which subpoenas you're going to honor. It has nothing to do with what anybody in the media thinks. It certainly has nothing to do with what Carlson thinks is a valid precedent. He just needs to gaslight you so you don't know what to believe anymore. It's okay. I'm here to show you the truth. It'll set you free.
And so, of course, with no media to push back against unconstitutional overreach, the Justice Department kept going. Then on June 9th of this year, the FBI arrested a Republican candidate for governor of Michigan. In fact, the candidate who polls show was in the lead. His name is Ryan Kelly. He came on our show to explain what happened next.
There was no crime committed, Tucker, no. Never entered the Capitol building exercising my First Amendment. Those of us that have questions about the 2020 election results, they want to intimidate us and they want to threaten us. Not just me and my family, but my supporters as well. All of us that love America. I think a lot of Americans see right through this, Tucker. They understand what the Democrats are up to, and it's not a big deal to them. They want to know what the government is going to do to actually do the things that are affecting their day-to-day life to bring solutions to our state and to our country.
Here's how the New York Times covered it. Ryan Kelly, a Republican running for governor in Michigan, who was at the Capitol during the Jan 6th attack, was arrested at his home in Allendale, Michigan on Thursday morning. Kelly is the first person running for election in a major state or federal race to be charged in connection with the attack. Kelly was charged with committing violence against a person or property on restricted grounds, damaging federal property, disorderly conduct, and entering the restricted building or grounds without permission. All 4 charges are misdemeanors. On Wednesday afternoon, a message was posted on a Facebook page for Kelly's campaign that said, "Political prisoner," echoing how many on the right have referred to those taken into custody in connection with the Jan 6th attack. Kelly was released after making a brief appearance alongside his lawyer in a federal courtroom. He was not required to post bail. So, those were definitely
recognizable crimes.
Note that last part, though. He was charged only with misdemeanors and not required to post bail. So I guess it's technically true that he's one of the
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
But it's certainly not much of a persecution. And how he can think he's a political prisoner just boggles the mind. And again, Tucker didn't say one thing about how this guy, who you've never heard of,
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And once again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. That's 0 for 12. Here's the funny part, though. Kelly is trying to use it to his advantage. exactly the opposite of what Tucker Carlson says these these prosecutions are for. Again, the New York Times. Ever since Ryan Kelly was charged last month with trespassing and other crimes, he has openly embraced his status as a Jan 6 defendant. On Friday, Kelly again leaned on a part of his biography that many candidates might have run from. He put a post on his official Facebook page demanding that all Jan 6 prisoners be released from federal custody. Every American should be outraged, wrote Mr. Kelly, who is not in custody as he awaits his trial. Remember, you could be the next for any reason big government doesn't approve of. As recently as Wednesday night, Kelly spoke openly about his Capitol riot charges, treating them as an asset, not a liability. Alas, Biden's and Garland's attacks on him were not enough to get him over the line, as he finished behind Kevin Rinke and Garrett Soldano, who all finished behind this woman. 2 days after receiving Trump's endorsement in the Michigan governor's race, Tudor Dixon would not say whether she still believes that Mr. Trump won the 2020 election. Ms. Dixon was unequivocal in her belief in Mr. Trump's disproved claims of victory as recently as May, but sidestepped the question during an appearance on Fox News Sunday. So, Carlson wants you to believe that Biden's Justice Department, being the evil geniuses they are, ignored Trump's candidate, who also has
questions about the 2020 election results,
and chose instead to go after somebody who had no chance of winning. You see how this whole persecution narrative is just nonsense, right? But let's hear the next miscarriage of justice.
Noticing a pattern here?
Yes. Carlson is continuously lying to you. You see it too, right?
Speak up against Joe Biden. Dare to organize other people to speak up against Joe Biden. Dare to run for office against Joe Biden.
Carlson's expecting you not to have noticed that he hasn't provided a single example of anybody speaking up against Joe Biden, organizing other people to speak up against Joe Biden, or running for office against Joe Biden. Every person Carlson has mentioned committed their alleged crimes before Joe Biden took office. But you know what he's setting you up for, though, right? Who's the one person who may be getting indicted very soon who's actually done any of those things? I'm telling you, he's priming you to do something stupid. Don't fall for it.
And you raise your chances of the FBI showing up at your house exponentially. It took months for us to recognize a pattern. In fact, it took coming to Brazil, where this kind of behavior is common, to realize that's exactly what's happening in our country.
And let's remind ourselves what happens in Brazil.
People go to prison in Brazil routinely when they lose elections.
And how many people has Tucker shown you who've gone to prison after losing an election? Correct. 0. How many people did Tucker even show you who lost an election? Again, 0. Who's the only person all over the news who recently lost an election and everybody's talking about whether he should be prosecuted for his numerous crimes? There's only one person. Tucker's just prepping you just to assume it will be a political persecution. You won't even have to look at the actual crimes with which he's been charged. You'll just know they're all bogus. Hopefully, this video might help you to open your eyes.
And as if you needed more evidence, these raids continue. On June 22nd of this month, the feds cornered former Trump attorney John Eastman in a parking lot and seized his phone. They didn't even provide a warrant before they did that. Watch.
Go ahead and put your arms up for me. Can I see the warrant? Sir, put your arms up for me.
Can I see the warrant, please? I'd like to see the warrant. I'd like to see the warrant. I'd like to see the warrant.
Let me see the warrant, sir.
I'd like to see the warrant before you take my property.
Sir, there comes the warrant right now, sir. It's right up.
There's the warrant. Right. I want you to see that they took my property before providing me with the warrant. I'd like to read the warrant.
Put your hands up, no warrant for you. What did that man do wrong? We still don't know.
Well, you don't, because you don't read the New York Times. Here's what they had to say. It's a little long, so bear with me. Federal agents armed with a search warrant have seized the phone of John Eastman. Eastman helped develop and promote a brazen plan to justify having Mike Pence single-handedly block or delay certification of the Electoral College results showing Biden's victory in the 2020 election. In a series of meetings and phone calls, Trump and Eastman pressured Pence to put the plan into action when Pence presided over a joint session of Congress on Jan 6, 2021. Pence's refusal to go along helped the violence that overwhelmed the Capitol that day and became a bloody symbol of Trump's effort to subvert the outcome of the election. Earlier this year, a federal judge in California, considering a civil suit concerning the release of Eastman's emails to the House Select Committee, concluded that Eastman and Trump most likely committed 2 felonies: obstruction of a proceeding before Congress and a conspiracy to defraud the United States. For their joint role in the pressure campaign against Pence, Eastman was also instrumental in advising Trump to create purported slates of electors backing Trump in key swing states won by Biden. These false pro-Trump electors were intended to give Pence a quasi-legal rationale for delaying or blocking the Electoral College certification on Jan 6, or even trying to throw the election to the House of Representatives. So, we know what that man did wrong. And for all of you who are still with me, you know what he did too. He was the primary reason the Jan 6 riots occurred. At least one federal judge who has seen the evidence and understands the law thinks Eastman committed
recognizable crimes.
We'll have to wait to see what the DOJ ultimately does. Until then, Eastman is just another person on Carlson's list of
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
Who hasn't been
arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
But if our justice system works like it should, that should change very soon. We can't let people get away with trying to throw out the votes of 81,268,924 Americans. We just can't. And I need to emphasize once again that Tucker didn't even try to show how Eastman
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And once again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. That's 0 for 13. But on to the last miscarriage of justice.
But again, is if you need more evidence.
Any evidence would be a start.
That this is a pattern that nobody is doing anything to stop. In fact, some Republicans in Washington are abetting it and encouraging it.
How dare those Republicans encourage the investigation and prosecution of crimes?
There's this. A day after that was shot, June 23rd, last week, the FBI searched the home of former Trump DOJ official Jeff Clark. Again, there's no suggestion he committed any crime of anything, that he did anything wrong. What he did was say things that Joe Biden and Joe Biden's Justice Department didn't like, so he was hauled out of his home in his pajamas for maximum public humiliation.
At one point, 12 agents and 2 Fairfax County police officers went into my house, searched it for 3.5 hours. They even brought along something, Tucker, I've never seen before or heard of, a electronic sniffing dog. And they took all of the electronics from my house. I don't blame the agents. I think what you're talking about in terms of weaponization is really about who's pointing the agents and telling them what to do. I just think we're living in a era that I don't recognize, and increasingly, Tucker, I don't recognize the country anymore with these kinds of Stasi-like things happening.
And here's how the New York Times covered it. The Justice Department's top leaders listened in stunned silence this month. One of their peers, they were told, had devised a plan with President Donald J. Trump to oust Jeffrey A. Rosen as acting Attorney General and wield the department's power to force Georgia state lawmakers to overturn its presidential election results. Clark had been devising ways to cast doubt on the election results and to bolster Trump's continuing legal battles and the pressure on Georgia politicians. Because Rosen had refused the president's entreaties to carry out those plans, Trump was about to decide whether to fire Rosen and replace him with Clark. The department officials convened on a conference call, then asked each other, what will you do if Rosen is dismissed? The answer was unanimous: they would resign. Their informal pact ultimately helped persuade Trump to keep Rosen in place, calculating that a fear over mass resignations at the top of the Justice Department would eclipse any attention on his baseless accusations over voter fraud. Trump's decision came only after Rosen and Clark made their competing cases to him in a bizarre White House meeting that 2 officials compared with an episode of Trump's reality show, The Apprentice, albeit one that could prompt a constitutional crisis. The previously unknown chapter was the culmination of the president's long-running effort to batter the Justice Department into advancing his political agenda. He also pressed Rosen to appoint special counsels, including one who would look into Dominion voting systems, a maker of election equipment that Trump's allies had falsely said was working with Venezuela to flip votes from Trump to Biden. The New York Times also printed the draft letter Clark wrote that lies about the Justice Department's position on election fraud. Dear Governor Kemp, Mr. Speaker, and President pro tempore, the Justice Department is investigating various irregularities in the 2020 election for President of the United States. The department will update you as we are able on investigatory progress. But at this time, we have identified significant concerns that may have impacted the outcome of the election in multiple states, including the state of Georgia. No doubt, many of Georgia state legislators are aware of irregularities sworn to by a variety of witnesses, and we have taken notice of their complaints. In light of these developments, the department recommends that the Georgia General Assembly should convene in special sessions so that its legislators are in position to take additional testimony, receive new evidence, and deliberate on the matters consistent with its duties under the U.S. Constitution. Time is of the essence, as the U.S. Constitution tasks Congress with convening in joint session to count electoral college certificates, consider objections to those certificates, and decide between any competing slates of elector certificates. The Justice Department, however, hadn't actually identified significant concerns. It wasn't recommending that the Georgia General Assembly should convene special sessions. Clark just made all of that up. In other words, he lied in his official capacity. Well, except for the competing slates of electors. They had fake electors all ready to go, and that too is being investigated. And this was also in the New York Times. A disciplinary board is moving to penalize Jeffrey Clark, the former Justice Department official who worked to undo the results of the 2020 election, including the possibility of disbarment. A complaint filed this week by the D.C. Bar's Office of Disciplinary Counsel, which governs lawyers in Washington, accused Clark of interfering in the administration of justice in his bid to keep Trump in power. The ethics complaint comes as the Justice Department's watchdog and federal prosecutors are also scrutinizing Clark for his efforts to wield the department's authority to falsely persuade election officials and the American public that Trump won the presidential race. In this article about the subpoena from the Jan 6 committee, the House committee investigating the Jan 6 Capitol riot issued a subpoena on Wednesday to Jeffrey Clark, who was involved in Trump's frenzied efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential elections. The subpoena seeks testimony records from Clark, who repeatedly pushed his colleagues at the Justice Department to help Trump undo his loss. The Select Committee needs to understand all the details about efforts inside the previous administration to delay the certification of the 2020 election and amplify misinformation about the election results, Representative Bernie Thompson said in a statement. We need to understand Mr. Clark's role in these efforts at the Justice Department and learn who was involved across the administration. In this one, covering the search of Clark's house, federal investigators carried out an early morning search on Wednesday at the home of Jeffrey Clark in connection with the department's sprawling criminal inquiry into efforts to overturn the 2020 election. It remained unclear exactly what the investigators may have been looking for, but Clark was central to Trump's unsuccessful effort in late 2020 to strong-arm the nation's top prosecutors in supporting his claims of election fraud, and the search suggested that the criminal investigation could be moving closer to Trump. So, as you can see, Tucker just lied to you again. There is much more than a suggestion that Clark did something wrong. He drafted a fraudulent letter in his official capacity to try to influence state lawmakers. There's a good chance he committed
recognizable crimes,
and justice would be served if he joined the ranks of
Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement.
And just like all the 13 people Carlson previously talked about, he didn't even try to show how Clark
disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And once again, if
you're not reading about this in the New York Times,
it's because you're not reading the New York Times, not because they didn't cover it. So that's the last of them. 0 for 14. Tucker lied to you about every last one of these people. He provided you with zero evidence for a single miscarriage of justice. Zero. You may have been able to claim that you didn't know before, but now you do. No reasonable person can think that Tucker isn't lying to you. Now you just need to figure out why.
I don't blame the agents, he says. Well, he's a bigger man than we are, because we do blame the agents. We're the agents who will resign their jobs before participating in the destruction of the U.S. Constitution. We should see them, any of them. Is anyone else noticing this?
And when one of you opens fire on FBI agents as a result of all the lies Tucker's been feeding you, he'll pretend to have no idea how that could possibly have happened, despite it being his only possible goal. Think about it. Why else would he lie about these investigations? Really, think about it. Can you come up with one other possible explanation for why Tucker Carlson is lying to you to convince you that the FBI is corrupt and cracking down on people just like you? You know, Trump voters. What do you think he wants you to do if Trump is indicted? It's one thing to fight for a noble cause. It's quite another to fight for a lie. Don't let him do this to you. Keep in mind that this is the best possible evidence of a corrupt system of justice that Tucker could show you. And he failed miserably. You should see that now. You should see how stupid it would be to go to battle for Trump for nothing but lies.
No. And no one's saying a word.
Except for the New York Times that covered 12 of the 13 stories that Tucker talked about. All in much greater detail than Tucker did. And unlike Tucker, honestly.
And because no one is, abuses of power escalate. This show has just learned that as of this week, the DOJ's Counterterrorism Division is prosecuting a lawyer involved in a dispute over election integrity. Counterterrorism aimed at people who ask questions about the last election results. And by the way, if that doesn't pique your interest about what exactly must have happened in the last election, nothing will. Why are they so angry?
That's odd. Does this lawyer not have a name? Of course, there's zero chance that Tucker's just making this up, right? Tucker would never lie just so he can ask the question why they're so angry. He would surely know that you'd recognize that he hasn't shown you a single person who's been angry.
Every election of your lifetime has been contested. Every single one. There's not an election a Republican wins in which Democrats don't say, yes, the voting machines were rigged. No one does a thing.
Wait, what?
No one does a thing.
Still, didn't catch that. Let's try that again.
No one does a thing.
I think that last lie broke his brain. Anyway, now Tucker's just trying to create memories for you. You know you can't name a single election in your lifetime where the losing presidential candidate claimed the voting machines were rigged. Not a single one. You know that. Don't let that false memory slip in. You know it's not true. Tucker's just trying to get you to shut off your brain. No presidential candidate, Democrat or Republican, has ever claimed that voting machines were rigged or that poll workers are cheating for the other candidate. Trump is the first and only. If enough of you let that blatantly false memory take hold, it will destroy our democracy. Please don't do that. Don't let him tell you things you know are not true.
But suddenly that's a crime. And in this case, the lawyer has not attacked the state capital of Arizona. Writers just did that after Roe v. Wade was overturned. Not a single one was arrested. He didn't burn down a church outside the White House in the name of George Floyd. Instead, like every person we just mentioned, his crime was making Joe Biden mad.
Except Tucker didn't show you a single instance, 0 for 14, of somebody who was prosecuted for making Joe Biden mad. Zero.
According to our Justice Department, he's now a domestic terrorist.
And yet we have no idea who he's talking about or what he or she supposedly did. I honestly have no idea what Carlson is doing with that.
Someone needs to stop this before it gets even crazier.
Someone needs to stop this? What do you think Tucker means by that? Did you come up with something? The entire point of Carlson's segment was to try to convince you that this was happening.
People go to prison routinely when they lose elections. Why have a political debate when you can just arrest people who disagree with you? Americans who have been arrested, detained by federal law enforcement on the orders of the Biden administration, not because they committed recognizable crimes, but because they disagreed with the political aims of the Biden administration.
And to demonstrate that all of them are in on it.
You're not reading about this in the New York Times.
And as you just saw, he failed on each and every instance he presented. All but one of these people had their run-ins with the law for one reason, and one reason only. They tried to overturn the results of a free and fair election. That is, just as it should be in any civilized society, illegal. The other person committed his election crimes in 2016. The 81,268,924 of us who voted against Trump are demanding that there be consequences for trying to subvert the democratic process. If you love this country like we do, you'd be demanding it too. Seriously, if Carlson had any evidence that the Justice Department is corrupt, he wouldn't have had to lie to you. Stop believing the lies. The country needs you. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe.